Stop affirming for money. Affirmations are noise if your state is poor. Shift the state, and money arrives as an echo, not a reward. Most people were never taught that waiting is not neutral. Waiting is not patience. Waiting is a posture of the mind, and it quietly declares something far more powerful than words ever could. It declares that the thing desired is elsewhere, deferred, delayed by time, circumstance, or permission. From childhood, money was introduced as something that arrives later, after effort, after approval, after struggle, after luck decides in your favor. No one ever called this belief dangerous, yet it has silently governed generations. Families pass it down without malice, like an old coat worn out of habit, never questioning whether it still fits. And so people wait. Wait to be ready, wait to be chosen, wait to deserve, never realizing that the act of waiting itself is the very state that keeps wealth at a distance. Neville Goddard shattered this illusion with a single uncompromising truth. You never get what you want. You get what you are. This is not motivational language. It is a law of consciousness. Desire does not summon results. Identity does. The world does not respond to hopes, affirmations, or effort performed from a state of lack. It responds to the assumptions you live from moment to moment. If you assume yourself to be someone who is still becoming, still arriving, still waiting, life faithfully reflects that assumption back to you. Money then appears as something ahead of you, rather than something that moves with you. This is why so many sincere, hardworking people remain stuck. They are attempting to acquire wealth while remaining loyal to the identity of someone who does not yet have it. Neville once used a simple but devastating analogy. Imagine standing on a train platform, watching a train that never departs. You check the schedule, you wait, you look around, you assume something is wrong with the train. Yet the truth is far more uncomfortable. The train does not move until you board it. Waiting on the platform feels logical, even responsible, but it guarantees immobility. In the same way, money does not move toward those who wait to feel secure, qualified, or validated first. The movement begins only when you internally occupy the state you have been postponing. The platform is familiar. Boarding feels premature, but nothing changes until you step in. This is why the idea of being the first millionaire in your family has been misunderstood. It is not a financial milestone measured by numbers in an account. It is a rupture in consciousness. It is the first time someone in the lineage stops agreeing with the internal posture of waiting. Generational wealth does not begin with income. It begins with a different state of being. Long before money appears outwardly, it appears inwardly as authority, calm, and assumption. The first millionaire is not the one who earns more. It is the one who no longer asks life for permission to have. That shift alone alters the trajectory of an entire family line. Modern neuroscience has quietly confirmed what Neville taught decades ago. Dr. Joe Dispenza explains that identity is not just a concept, it is encoded in the nervous system. Patterns of lack, struggle, and delay are biologically rehearsed until they feel normal. When someone changes their self-concept, they are not merely thinking differently, they are interrupting inherited emotional circuits. This is why stepping into a new financial identity can feel disorienting, even threatening. The body is accustomed to the old state, yet the moment identity shifts, the signal sent to life changes. New responses become possible, new outcomes begin organizing, not because effort increased, but because the broadcaster changed. This brings us to the core promise that governs everything you are about to hear. Wealth does not begin when money arrives. Wealth begins the instant waiting ends internally. The moment you stop positioning yourself as someone who is almost there, someday there, or becoming there, and instead assume the psychological location of already being, the entire mechanism of life rearranges itself. This is not force. It is not visualization as fantasy. It is relocation. You move states. And once you understand this, you will never look at money, effort, or time the same way again. At some point, it must be said plainly, waiting is not passive, and it is not harmless. Waiting is an assumption, and every assumption is creative. When someone waits for money, they are not merely pausing action, they are declaring internally that money is absent now. The subconscious does not hear explanations or intentions. It hears position. It hears identity. And the identity of one who waits is always the identity of one who does not yet have. This is why waiting feels responsible and mature, yet produces nothing but delay. Consciousness cannot express what it is not occupying, and waiting is the occupation of absence. Consider how natural waiting feels, how socially acceptable it is. People wait for the right time, the right break, the right confidence, the right signal. Yet none of these ever arrive on their own. Waiting subtly reinforces the idea that something external must move first. This reverses the law entirely. Life is not responding to circumstances. Circumstances are responding to state. When waiting becomes habitual, it hardens into a self-concept. The person no longer sees themselves as wealthy in delay, but as someone who must always be preparing for wealth. Preparation becomes a permanent identity, and arrival is endlessly postponed. Imagine standing outside a store late at night, lights off, doors closed, assuming it will open when someone inside decides to let you in. You wait, you check your phone, you assume the problem is timing. What you do not realize is that the door has no handle on the outside. The store only opens from within. No amount of waiting, hoping, or watching will change this. The moment you step inside, the lights come on automatically. In the same way, money does not respond to longing from the outside. It responds to occupation from within. Waiting keeps you outside the very state that activates flow. This is why effort so often fails. Effort performed from waiting is effort performed from non-being. It carries the emotional tone of not yet, and that tone is creative. Even action, when taken from waiting, reinforces delay. The subconscious faithfully continues the pattern, not because it is cruel, but because it is consistent. It simply reflects back the state you are living in, and as long as that state is waiting, life will continue to provide more reasons to wait. There comes a quiet but unavoidable question hidden beneath all this. If waiting is the confession of absence, what is the posture that signals presence? If money does not move toward those who wait, what inner position causes it to respond? The answer does not lie in working harder or believing longer. It lies in a reversal so complete that waiting becomes impossible. To understand that reversal, the relationship between identity and money must be turned inside out. For most of their lives, people have been trained to believe that money is the reward for exertion. Work more, struggle longer, sacrifice harder, and eventually something will be granted. This belief feels moral. It feels fair. Yet it quietly contradicts the way reality actually functions. Neville Goddard's law states that consciousness precedes form, meaning that what you are being internally determines what appears externally. Effort does not create identity. Identity determines the effectiveness and direction of effort. When this order is misunderstood, people exhaust themselves trying to force outcomes that cannot arrive, while the inner position remains unchanged. Money is not impressed by strain. It does not respond to desperation, overwork, or emotional intensity. It responds to recognition. The world is always asking a single question: who is this? And it answers according to the state you occupy. When someone sees themselves as striving, hustling, or chasing, money mirrors that relationship by remaining just out of reach. The chase itself becomes the pattern. This is not punishment. It is precision. Consciousness can only reflect itself. Imagine a bank system that does not update accounts based on requests but based on identity verification. You can submit forms endlessly, make deposits, argue your case, but until the system recognizes you as the account holder, nothing changes. The moment recognition occurs, the balance updates automatically. No struggle is required. This is how money works at the level of consciousness. Life updates conditions only after the internal identity has been accepted. Until then, effort is merely noise within the system. This is the great reversal that very few grasp. People assume identity will change after money arrives, but identity must be claimed before money can appear. Wealth does not create confidence. Confidence creates the conditions wealth flows into. Authority does not come from accumulation. Accumulation follows authority. The inner claim always precedes the outer confirmation. Waiting for proof before assuming the state keeps the proof permanently suspended. Once this is seen clearly, effort takes on a different role. It is no longer a tool for forcing outcomes, but a natural expression of an already established state. Action becomes calm, precise, and effective because it is no longer trying to become something. It is simply moving as what it already is. This is why some people appear lucky while others struggle endlessly. They are not working harder. They are operating from a different identity. The implication is unavoidable. If money responds to identity rather than effort, then chasing it is a misunderstanding of the law. Identity must be assumed, not pursued. The moment this assumption stabilizes, the entire relationship with money shifts. To see how deep this goes, it becomes necessary to examine where identity itself is formed and how inherited states quietly limit what feels possible. Long before money ever becomes a personal concern, it is absorbed as an atmosphere. Families do not only pass down names, habits, and stories, they pass down states of being. These states shape what feels realistic, what feels dangerous, and what feels out of reach. A family may never speak directly about limitation, yet it is felt in tone, in caution, in what is celebrated and what is quietly dismissed as impossible. Over time, this atmosphere hardens into an internal ceiling, an invisible boundary that defines how far one is allowed to go without feeling out of place. Neville Goddard made it clear that states are entered individually. They are not inherited permanently, no matter how familiar they feel. A state can persist across generations only because it is unconsciously re-entered, not because it is unavoidable. This distinction matters. What feels like destiny is often just repetition. The mind learns a particular arrangement of life and returns to it automatically, assuming it is home. Yet a state is not a prison. It is a location in consciousness, and locations can be exited. Picture someone standing in a small room they have occupied for years. The walls are close, the ceiling low, and movement feels restricted. They assume this is the size of the space available to them. Then, in a quiet moment, they notice something they had overlooked. The door was never locked. No barrier was ever placed there except assumption. The room did not shrink. Awareness did. Leaving does not require force, only recognition. This is how inherited financial states operate. The limitation was never enforced by reality, only by belief repeated until it felt structural. Breaking a family ceiling does not require rejection of one's past. It does not demand conflict or separation. It requires clarity. The moment someone realizes they are no longer obligated to occupy a familiar state, a new option appears. But leaving one state without entering another creates instability. The old patterns pull back, not out of malice, but out of habit. Consciousness seeks coherence. To exit an inherited state fully, a new one must be assumed deliberately. This is where many hesitate. Assuming a new state feels unnatural at first. It lacks the emotional weight of repetition. It does not yet feel proven. Yet this discomfort is not a warning. It is a signal of transition. The mind is no longer recycling the past. It is standing at the threshold of something unconditioned. To stabilize this movement, the concept of living in the end must be understood not as imagination, but as position. There is a subtle misunderstanding that has distorted this teaching for many. The end is often imagined as a future scene, a visualized outcome waiting at the far end of time. Yet Neville Goddard was precise in his language. The end is not a moment that arrives. It is a state that is entered. It is a psychological location, not a calendar date. To live in the end means to think, feel, and react from the position of fulfillment, not to hope toward it. When this distinction is missed, imagination becomes effort, and effort collapses back into waiting. Assuming the millionaire position does not mean pretending to have money or ignoring practical reality. It means occupying the internal posture of someone for whom money is settled. The emotions change first. Decisions become quieter. Urgency dissolves. The nervous system no longer signals scarcity. This shift is subtle yet profound. It is the difference between standing at the door and sitting comfortably inside the room. The outer world may look the same at first, but the internal coordinates have moved, and life always follows internal coordinates. Imagine sitting in the chair of a chief executive before the title has been announced. Nothing about the chair itself confers authority, yet something unmistakable changes the moment one occupies it. The body adjusts, the breath slows, perception widens, conversations are interpreted differently. This is not fantasy, it is alignment. The position reorganizes behavior naturally. In the same way, assuming the end reorganizes thought and action without force, one does not need to remember to act wealthy. The state does the acting. What stabilizes this assumption is not constant mental effort, but a gentle, repeated return to the feeling of completion. The end becomes familiar through contact, not through strain. Over time, the state gains weight. It feels normal. When that happens, the mind stops checking reality for confirmation. It no longer asks when. It no longer negotiates with time. This stabilization does not occur during busy hours of the day. It occurs in a quieter threshold, when the mind is relaxed enough to accept a new position without resistance. That threshold has always been known. It is the borderland between waking and sleep, where identity is most fluid and impressions sink deepest. To understand how the assumed end is installed rather than imagined, the role of this state must be examined carefully. There is a reason Neville Goddard placed such importance on the state akin to sleep. It is not mystical for the sake of mystery, it is mechanical. SATS is the condition in which the conscious mind loosens its grip and the subconscious becomes receptive without argument. During the day, identity is defended. Thoughts are filtered. Beliefs are protected. At night, those defenses soften. The mind becomes suggestible, not weak, but open. This openness is the doorway through which states are accepted as reality. What enters here does not need repetition through force. It takes root because resistance is absent. Think of consciousness as a system that runs programs continuously. During waking hours, the system is active, busy, monitoring threats, comparing, correcting. Attempting to install a new identity during this time often triggers conflict. The old program resists replacement. In SATS, however, the system is offline. The background noise quiets. This is when new software can be uploaded cleanly. The feeling of wealth, authority, and sufficiency is not argued with. It is received. And once received, it begins operating automatically. This is why the experience in SATS must be felt rather than watched. It is not a scene observed from a distance, but a position inhabited. The body responds as if the state is real because, to the subconscious, it is. The nervous system registers completion. The emotional tone shifts from anticipation to possession. This shift is subtle, but it is decisive. The mind does not need to understand how it will happen. It only needs to accept that it already has. Once this installation occurs, something predictable happens. The old identity does not disappear quietly. It attempts to reassert itself. Thoughts of doubt, memories of struggle, and familiar emotional reactions surface, not as signs of failure, but as remnants of a previous program seeking relevance. This is not opposition from life. It is inertia from habit. The new state does not need to fight these remnants. Its stability comes from familiarity, not from argument. Over time, the balance shifts. The new identity feels more natural than the old one ever did. Waiting no longer makes sense because the inner position has changed. The mind stops scanning for evidence. The body stops rehearsing lack. This is how wealth identity becomes rooted, not as a belief held up by effort, but as a state lived in quietly. Yet as this rooting deepens, another layer often surfaces, one that is more emotional than intellectual. It is the feeling of loyalty to the past and the subtle fear of outgrowing it. When identity begins to shift, resistance does not always arrive as doubt. More often, it arrives as emotion, a quiet guilt, a sense of disloyalty, a feeling that moving forward somehow means leaving others behind. This is one of the least discussed barriers to wealth, yet it is among the most powerful. Consciousness can be divided, holding one image of expansion while remaining emotionally anchored to a past that equates sameness with safety. The mind may accept new ideas, but the heart hesitates, and that hesitation slows movement. Family narratives carry emotional gravity. They teach survival, endurance, and resilience, often under conditions that required caution rather than expansion. Outgrowing these narratives can feel like betrayal, even when no one has asked for loyalty. The old state whispers that success will separate, isolate, or make one unrecognizable. This whisper is persuasive because it is familiar. It speaks in the voice of belonging, and so the individual unconsciously applies brakes, slowing progress to remain emotionally aligned with the past. Imagine leaving a hometown that shaped you. It taught you how to survive, how to read people, how to endure. Gratitude is real, yet the town cannot offer what lies beyond it. Staying out of loyalty eventually becomes stagnation, not because the place is wrong, but because growth requires movement. Leaving does not erase what was learned. It honors it by using it as a foundation rather than a boundary. The same is true of financial identity. Expansion does not invalidate the past, it transcends it. This emotional loyalty creates divided consciousness. One part steps forward, another looks back. Energy disperses, momentum weakens. Yet the moment loyalty dissolves, not through rejection but through understanding, something remarkable happens. Movement accelerates naturally. The fear of separation fades because it was never required. States change without severing connection. One can move ahead without dragging the past along or cutting it off entirely. When this division resolves, effort decreases further. The new state no longer feels like an act of rebellion or departure. It feels like alignment. And from alignment, life responds with less friction. Opportunities appear without strain. Decisions feel obvious. This sets the stage for what Neville called the bridge of incidents, the sequence through which the assumed state expresses itself in the world. Once a state is assumed and stabilized, life begins to reorganize itself in ways that feel both ordinary and precise. Neville Goddard referred to this unfolding as the bridge of incidents, not because it is dramatic, but because it is inevitable. The bridge is not constructed by planning every step or forcing outcomes. It assembles itself as consciousness moves. Each incident appears reasonable on its own, often unnoticed at the time, yet together they form a coherent path that could not have been designed from the old state. What changes first is not circumstance, but perception. Situations that once felt intimidating lose their charge. Conversations shift tone. Opportunities appear without the sense of strain that once accompanied them. It is not that life suddenly becomes generous. It is that the individual no longer resists what matches their state. Doors that were always present become visible because the identity now fits the room they lead into. Imagine being invited into spaces that once felt out of reach, not through status or force, but through familiarity. You no longer feel like an outsider looking in. The rooms feel normal. The people feel relatable. The environment does not demand performance. This is not confidence gained through rehearsal. It is recognition through alignment. The state has changed, and life mirrors that change with effortless precision. The bridge unfolds without emotional spikes. There is no constant excitement, no dramatic signs announcing success. In fact, one of the most reliable indicators that the state is real is its quietness. Things begin to work without commentary. Money-related events occur without triggering anxiety or celebration. They simply happen. This neutrality is not indifference, it is stability. Consciousness has settled and the world reflects that settlement. Because the bridge is constructed from the assumed end, there is nothing to manage or accelerate. Interference only arises when the old habit of waiting or forcing attempts to reassert itself. When that habit dissolves, movement continues unimpeded. And as the bridge nears completion, something even deeper becomes apparent. Wealth, once emotional and charged, begins to lose its intensity. It becomes ordinary. This ordinariness marks the entrance into a different kind of rest. There is a moment in consciousness that cannot be forced, rehearsed, or imitated, yet when it arrives it is unmistakable. Money loses its emotional charge. It no longer feels like a threat, a promise, or a measure of worth. This is what Neville Goddard called the Sabbath, not as a religious symbol, but as a psychological condition of rest. The Sabbath is entered only after the inner work is complete, when the assumption has been accepted so fully that the mind stops returning to the question of whether it will happen. The question dissolves because the state has already been occupied. Before this rest appears, money is emotional because it is unresolved. It carries memory, fear, anticipation, and meaning beyond itself. It represents safety, escape, validation, or repair. As long as wealth is tied to these emotional needs, it remains charged, and anything charged is unstable. The nervous system stays alert, scanning for loss or gain. Even success can feel tense because it is still being monitored. The Sabbath arrives when wealth is no longer asked to perform an emotional function. It simply exists as a natural extension of the assumed state. In this condition, sufficiency is not calculated. It is felt. The mind does not rehearse future scenarios or replay past shortages. Attention is no longer pulled toward money as a problem to solve. This does not mean thought disappears or that life becomes passive. It means the internal argument ends, the identity has settled, consciousness rests where it once strained. This rest is the clearest sign that the state has been entered correctly. Neville emphasized that the Sabbath follows assumption as naturally as sleep follows a long day. It cannot be demanded. It arrives when effort ceases because effort is no longer needed. This is why those who truly enter this state often describe it as ordinary. There is no fireworks display, no announcement, just a quiet knowing that the matter is settled. The emotional urgency that once surrounded money fades, and with it fades the compulsion to control outcomes. Consider how you move through a familiar environment. You do not question every step or analyze every turn. Trust is implicit. The Sabbath of wealth feels the same. Decisions are made calmly. Opportunities are approached without tension. Money-related events occur without inner commentary. This absence of commentary is crucial. Consciousness is no longer narrating lack or possibility. It is simply present in sufficiency. This is also where many become confused because they equate rest with stagnation. Yet the opposite is true. When the emotional charge disappears, movement becomes more fluid. Action is no longer distorted by fear or desire. It is precise, timely, and effective. The mind is no longer split between wanting and doubting. It is unified, and unified consciousness moves faster than anxious effort ever could. At its deepest level, the Sabbath reveals something unexpected. Wealth was never the destination. It was the byproduct of alignment. The real shift was internal relocation, not accumulation. When consciousness rests in the assumption of sufficiency, life mirrors that rest automatically. There is nothing left to fix, prove, or earn. The waiting has ended completely. And from this stillness, the entire journey can be seen not as a struggle, but as a return to a state that was always available. Everything ultimately returns to one central realization. The moment waiting ends, a relocation occurs within consciousness. Nothing external needs to shift first for this movement to take place. No proof is required. No permission is granted. Neville Goddard's teaching is uncompromising on this point. States create experience. The instant you stop identifying as someone who is waiting for money, you move into a different state. And from that state, life must respond differently. This is not belief or optimism. It is structural law. The phrase, first millionaire in your family, has meaning only at this level. It does not describe a number, a lifestyle, or a public achievement. It describes a break in consciousness. It means being the first to stop occupying the inherited state of delay, effort, and emotional dependence on money. It means being the first to recognize that wealth is not earned into existence, but expressed from identity. When one individual exits an old state, the lineage does not magically change overnight, but the pattern is interrupted. A new reference point is established, and that alone alters what becomes possible for those who follow. Neville's mirror analogy brings this truth into sharp focus. The outer world is reflective, not creative. A mirror cannot display an image that is not first presented to it. Asking circumstances to change before identity does is like asking a reflection to smile before the face does. The reflection is obedient. Consciousness is the origin. When the inner image changes, the mirror must follow. Frustration fades when this is understood, because there is no longer anything to force or persuade. This is where modern insight quietly aligns with Neville's work. Dr. Joe Dispenza explains that sustained identity change rewires the nervous system. When a new state is lived consistently, emotional reactions reorganize, habitual responses weaken, and the body learns a new normal. Destiny shifts not because events were controlled, but because the internal signal changed. Over time, what once felt unfamiliar becomes natural. What once felt impossible becomes ordinary. At this stage, wealth loses its drama. It no longer feels like salvation or threat. Calm replaces urgency. Authority replaces hope. The question of when disappears because it belongs to a state that has already been exited. The individual no longer relates to money emotionally, and this neutrality is the clearest sign that the state has stabilized. Life responds to this stability with ease. Everything converges on the same quiet instruction Neville repeated throughout his lectures. Enter the state, akin to sleep, and assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not as a ritual, not as repetition, but as relocation. In that softened threshold, identity is accepted without resistance. The feeling of financial authority settles into the body as fact. From that point forward, the bridge unfolds without force. There is nothing missing, nothing to wait for, nothing to become. The state already exists. The only movement required was internal. And Neville's reminder stands not as comfort but as law. You are already that which you seek.